I still do free speeches. I think it's important. I think it helps you get better. You meet people. We can't get entitled with what we deserve before we deserve it. Because if that's the case, you're never going to get on the shows that you should. And you're never going to meet the people that might change your journey in a way that you don't know. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all the time. I hope you enjoyed the latest episode. Last week's was number 81, one practice that really helped my confidence with speaking. I think I gave a couple different practices. Today, for episode number 82, an important lesson about getting on other podcasts. At this point, I have been on, cannot speak, even though we did an episode on speaking last week. I have been on many a podcast. I don't know how many, 600, 700, 800. I know those numbers are drastically different, but it's in that realm. Maybe you are listening to this podcast because I was on your podcast and we talked about it after, and then you came over here to listen. I'm very, very grateful for you. But today I want to talk about one of the lessons that I have learned about getting on other podcasts from my experience, but honestly, mostly from client experiences. Today will be a quick episode because this isn't super, super deep. The important lesson is that a lot of us have very, very wild, misaligned expectations about the podcast that we're going to be able to get on without knowing someone. So in this moment, I'm realizing it's one of, if not the first podcasts I ever went on, was a gentleman named Anthony Trucks. And he has a podcast it was called Aw Shift. I don't know if it still is anymore. But we had met Anthony at an event. And he had been on our podcast. And he's very, very successful. He's a very successful entrepreneur, international speaker, speaks on massive stages, coaches a lot of big companies. That never should have been the first podcast I was ever on. I just happened to know Anthony, and I think he might have known a little bit about my story through us talking to him, and he wanted to have me on. But that is very, very, very rare. I was also on another podcast pretty early on. It was called, I think it was like the 1% Life podcast or something like that. It was hosted by Sam Bakhtiar, who has since passed away, so rest in peace. But this was another podcast that I had no right of being on that early, but I knew someone who knew him, and that's how I ended up getting on the show, to the point where he had a Ferrari in the background of his podcast studio because he recorded it in his garage. That was way ahead of what I was ready for. So here's the lesson. The lesson is you are most likely going to struggle to get on other podcasts that are any bigger than your podcast. And really think about it. When you're trying to have guests on, that are bigger than you usually, right? Because one of the reasons we want to have guests is because we want them to share the message, or we want to be exposed to their audience. We want to get some traction. We want the search engine optimization, whatever it is. But very rarely, at least from what I've seen, are people looking to get guests that nobody's ever heard of. So I think about it this way. If you have a podcast that has 50 downloads per episode, the shows that you're going to get on most likely probably have 30 to 70 downloads per episode, unless you're known for something different than your podcast. But if this is your realm, you're dipping your toe into podcasting as the way to build your brand and your online brand, it's probably going to be that way for you. You're probably only going to be able to jump a level or two. Why this matters? Because I think a lot of people have the belief that it's a waste of time to go on podcasts that are smaller than yours, when in reality, it's a very good use of time depending on the results you're trying to get. So I'm always thinking of how many outputs can I get from one input of my time. So again, we're not doing this right now because we're more worried about staying afloat with Next Level University because there's so much going on. But eventually, I will break up this episode into 15 pieces of social media content and I'll share it everywhere. I'm not doing that right now. I should be. It's just I'm struggling to keep up with what's already going on. 1 unit of my time is an audio episode. It's a video episode. It'll be however many shorts. It could also be a blog on a website in the future. It could be a post in a Facebook group. It could be an email, right? There's a lot of places it can go. I'm thinking of the same thing when it comes to going on other podcasts. Yes, we go on other podcasts because we want their audience to come listen to us. Or we go on other podcasts because we want to talk about our product or our service. But one of the best parts of going on other podcasts is you're going to get to practice your story. You're going to become a much better speaker because you're going to be speaking a lot. If this person is a good host, they're going to create content for you. So you're going to get content sent to you or tagged. You're going to get tagged in it on social media. That helps increase your credibility. You're going to have the opportunity to talk to a lot of people. So who knows, the hosts might end up being your clients depending on what you have going on. And it's not just that one thing of listens. It's not just, well, if I go on a bunch of shows, I'll get a bunch of listens. That is definitely a possibility. But what you're also going to do is you're going to create opportunities that you're missing out on if you say no to a small show. So my hope in today's episode, my real lesson is a lot of people are missing opportunities to go on podcasts because they think they're quote unquote too small. If it's a similar size to you, why do you think they'd have you on if you don't have a big audience yet? And again, I'm not saying that to be mean. We've had people on our podcast in the day that didn't have any social media presence really. They were just doing really cool stuff or they had a really impactful story. But when we were trying to get guests, we were aiming for people that would help us grow the show. And we'd have people on that we had really good episodes with. If they had a large following, we'd want to have them on again because maybe they'll share this piece of social media content. I remember we had, her name's Catherine Nash. She's Mini But Mighty is her Instagram handle. We had her on for like episode, I don't know, this was maybe the 30s or 40s. And we became really good friends with her. And when we had her on and she shared it, I remember we went from getting like, I don't know, maybe 100 listens per episode to her episode got 4,000 in like a week. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, we should definitely have her on again in the future. And we did. I think we had her on 2 or 3 times. And again, she ended up being a good friend. We'd work out with her. When we went down to Florida, we went and saw her because she had moved to Florida.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Hurwitz. So last year, I wanted to quit everything. I wanted to throw in the towel. I wanted to hang up my microphone. And Kevin said no. Kevin said, keep going, Jen. You've got this. And oh my God, I'm going to cry. And I did. Coaches need coaches, y'all. And working with Kevin has been one of the best experiences of my life. Oh my God, I'm crying. Kevin, you are the best. I could not do this without you. And thank you. Thank you for being you and the amazing human that you are.
So my ultimate goal, my ultimate thought process with this entire episode is there's way more than just the one thing that we're going to try to achieve. Yes, we want to get listens by being on other shows, but the understanding that a lot of us are turning down opportunities that would really, really, really benefit us. It's the same thing where I've had a lot of clients say, well, nobody's willing to pay me to speak, so I'm not going to speak. I still do free speeches. I think it's important. I think it helps you get better. You meet people. We can't get entitled with what we deserve before we deserve it. Because if that's the case, you're never going to get on the shows that you should. And you're never going to meet the people that might change your journey in a way that you don't know. I've met people that if you were to look at our podcast versus theirs, that I quote unquote shouldn't have been on, but I don't care about how big the show is. I want to go meet people. I want to go add value. I want to practice my craft. I want to get better at speaking. I want to get better at podcasting. I want to be the best podcaster I can be. I've met people that I still talk to this day. I was DMing someone today that the show is small, but I wanted to do it because I enjoyed what the show was about. I wasn't looking at it as how many listens are we going to get from this. That's something I learned pretty early on, that if that's the only thing you're looking at, it's going to be really, really, really disheartening. Because think of it. Okay, let's really, really think about this. If you have a guest on your podcast, and let's say you're getting like 50 downloads per episode, how many people do you think are going to go check out the guest? Let's just say 5 people. Okay, if you are on a podcast and they have 50 people that listen, how many people do you think are going to come check you out? Maybe it's 5 people. You'd have to do a lot of shows to really start to see some traction. I still think it's worth it for 5 people. 5 people adds up. If you do 4 shows a week, that's 20 people a week. That's 1,000 people a year. That adds up and that compounds and compounds. But then if I told you, well, what if you were going to get way better at speaking? What if you were going to get way better at storytelling? What if you were going to actually fall in love with the process of being asked questions? What if you were going to get content created for you? What if you were going to have a bunch of stuff on YouTube when I search your name, and you're also going to have 5 people that come check you out? You'd probably be like, yeah, sure. That's so many different things. Instead of just saying, well, maybe 5 people will come check you out. So that's really my lesson in today's podcast, is I think a lot of us want to get on big shows. And of course, yes, 100%. But don't allow that to stop you from getting on small shows. Because if you're just saying, I'm going to wait until I can get on a certain size show, you may never get there because you won't have the practice. Or you might get there and it might go horribly wrong. I know people who didn't really practice speaking, but were really good at other things, who had the opportunity to speak on stage and they bombed it and it didn't go well because they weren't prepared. They didn't put in the reps. There's just so many benefits of going on someone's podcast far beyond how many listens it's going to translate for you. If you can lock that in and really understand that, you're going to meet a lot of people and you never know what's going to happen. You never know. You might go on a show as a guest, you might meet someone and they might be one of your favorite episodes ever, and you might have them on your show to record, and who knows? I've seen people that have recorded together end up being co-hosts in the future, starting businesses together. You never know. So that's really my goal in today's episode. That is the lesson. A lot of people are missing opportunities because they think the show needs to be bigger. When in reality, if you're new to being on other shows, just getting on podcasts, regardless of the size, is a great place to start. You just never know. You never know what's going to happen. And then here's the other thing. And again, I understand this is contextually different, but I have gone on other shows and they have come over to our community and eventually signed up for group coaching or signed up for a podcast breakthrough session or whatever it may be. Now, I know I'm a podcast coach, so when I go on other podcasts, it's different. But if you have a self-improvement podcast and you go on other self-improvement shows, you never know. You never know what might happen. The person might come over to your community and check it out if you have a Facebook group or whatever it is. And when I say the person, I mean the host. The host might come over and end up being a client. The host might be someone you collaborate with in the future. So the understanding that, yes, we're there to speak to an audience, but yes, we're also speaking to one person who we have an opportunity to build a relationship with. That is the big lesson that I wanted to talk about today. So this is a quick one. I still haven't fixed my chair. If you can't hear me, my chair just gave out and gave me a small panic attack. All right. As always, if you want to book a podcast breakthrough session, I will have my link in the show notes. It is totally free. I'm not going to sell you on anything. There are no strings attached. It is you and I rocking out for 30 minutes about your podcast. If you don't have a podcast yet, that's okay. We can talk about how to get started. If you have the idea, but you don't know where to go, we can talk about that. I can help you name it, whatever it is. I know it can be scary to hop on a Zoom call with a stranger from the internet, but I promise I have done many, many, many of these. So no matter where you are in your journey, it doesn't matter. Maybe you want to make money with your podcast. You don't know where to start, whatever it is. You want to practice your speaking. I will add value in whatever way I can, and I promise you are safe to have a conversation behind the scenes, regardless of where you are in your journey. So I would love to chat with you if that is aligned. Next week, for episode number 83, how much does your social media following actually matter? That episode is going to go in a bunch of different ways, but I want to talk about that. because podcasting is weird when it comes to social media. Because if you looked at my social media, you'd probably never assume we have the amount of listens we have. I don't have that many followers. I think I have 1,500 or something on Instagram and maybe 1,500 on Facebook and maybe 1,500 on LinkedIn. So what's that? 4,500 total. Not a ton. And it's not like I'm going viral and getting, a million impressions on my content. So how much does social media actually matter in terms of the following for your podcast? That is what we're going to talk about next week. As always, I hope the people outside your studio, wherever you're recording, your neighbors, the people doing the lawn, whatever it is, I hope that they're not interrupting your recording schedule. I hope you are still maintaining the momentum that you built at the beginning of 2024. I hope the guests you want to have on are saying yes. I hope you're going on another podcast. I hope your storytelling feels more inspired and more aligned. And I hope you're enjoying the process, most of all. Until next week, keep on podcasting, keep on crushing it, and we will talk to you then.